Hi there. Have you ever wondered, as a first-time buyer or someone who's never bought a property before, how you can get onto the property ladder? My name is Charles Kelly, Money Tips, and I run a property podcast as well. I want to give you today 6 tips to help you get started, get on the property ladder. Now, tip number 1, it might sound a bit obvious, but save for a deposit. Now, you might say, everyone knows that. Any idiot can save money. But how many of you are actually doing it? How many of you are saving in the right place? Are you using the government ISAs? Are you using tax-free environments to save your money? And do you have a target? Do you actually know how much you need to save? How long you need to save for? The type of property you're going for? Go get yourself a target, write it down, go and start looking at the types of properties you need rather than just having a vague idea. Work out your income, see a broker even to say to that broker, how much could I get as a mortgage? How much would I qualify as a mortgage? And how much do I need to save as a deposit? So it's easy to say, yeah, everyone knows how to save, but you've got to put these things into a system, write it down, set yourself a target, set yourself a goal. Okay, tip number 2 is to build your credit rating and maintain your credit rating as well. I always add to that. Now, that might sound like, what's that? What's a credit rating? Well, a credit rating is like a point score that you get for yourself when lenders or a credit card company or even a landlord, when they're doing a credit search on you, would look to see how viable you are and whether you are the right sort of person to lend money to. So you'd have a credit score. Now, you can find out your credit score for free on various online sites. You can pay a little bit extra to get a wider score on more sites, but you can go to places like Equifax and find out what your credit score is. And the ways of improving it is, first of all, to keep your credit history clean. Don't pay things late. Make sure you're paying everything on time. Set up direct debit so you never miss payments, because lenders and institutions like utility companies will report late payments. Keep your credit rating up to date. If you haven't got a credit card, I suggest getting a credit card and just using it but paying it off every month so that you've got some form of credit history. Okay, that's not the be all and end all as people say, but it does help if you have a credit card, so you're building up your credit rating and maintaining your credit rating. Tip number 3, if you're searching for a property, you might be living in a city centre at the moment, which is far too expensive. You can afford to rent there, but you couldn't afford to buy. So you might need to consider looking further afield, moving out to a cheaper area. A lot of people can work from home now. They don't need to live right in town. So consider cheaper areas, consider up and coming areas. A few years ago, nobody wanted to live in Hackney and Dalston. Pardon me if you live in Hackney and Dalston, but it was quite a rough kind of area. And then it became up and coming. The middle classes moved in. Now you can't afford to live there. Hoxton was another area like that. So find the next up and coming area. Parts of South London, South East London became up and coming. Barking was an up and coming area at one time. So maybe you've got to look for areas that in the future might be up and coming. Also, if you're looking in an area, look for the worst property in the best street, the worst property in the best area, rather than the other way around. Look for a property that might need work doing to it, and consider how you might acquire that property which is below market value at the time. Tip number 4 is to look at equity release schemes. This means asking a grandparent or a parent to release equity from their properties. A lot of people in the baby boomer generation are sitting on a huge pile of equity in their property, and perhaps they're thinking, well, we'll leave this property to the children and grandchildren when we die. But why do that? You can get the money out of that property, the equity out of that property now under an equity release scheme, and give your children and grandchildren that money now to buy the property rather than waiting until you die. It also reduces your inheritance tax liability if you live for 7 years after you make that gift. It doesn't mean you've got a mortgage in it. Well, you technically do have a mortgage, but you won't make any payments on that mortgage. The interest will roll up. You can pay it if you want to, but you don't have to. And then the mortgage is paid off either when you die or when you sell the property. Maybe you need to downsize, and then you can sell that property and pay it off then. But I think it's a great way of giving money to your children and grandchildren now to help them get on the property ladder when they need the money now, not waiting another 20 years, pardon me, until somebody reaches the bitter end. Then you've got to wait for probate. It could be another 2 years before they get the money. So just consider that. I'm bringing on an expert shortly who will talk about the ins and outs of equity release, but I think it's a great scheme to help you. And you can use equity release actually to improve your own life, maybe to buy yourself things that you dreamed about but didn't know how you could get the money. It could be a holiday home, it could be a boat, it could be a cruise or trip around the world. So consider equity release. Number 5 is look at rent-to-rent deals, rent-to-own deals. Now this is where you rent a property, but you do a deal with the landlord that you are buying a portion of this property. It's called rent-to-own. So you're paying rent, but you're paying a proportion of the rental payment towards buying that house. Now this is where you might struggle to get a mortgage, for instance. You can't get a mortgage, but you can do a rent-to-own deal. Lenders might not entertain you for a mortgage. Maybe you've got a bad credit rating. Maybe you haven't got a deposit. So rent-to-own kind of deals are a great way of getting yourself on the property ladder in time. It takes time. But instead of paying rent and wasting that rent, do a rent-to-own and put some of your payments towards buying that property. How does it benefit the landlord? Well, the landlord has a great tenant in the property. The landlord can sell your property at an agreed price now, but you finish off the transaction in many years to come. There's various ways of structuring that, but I think it's a really good deal. And number 6 then is to consider buying with a friend or doing a JV, a joint venture with somebody to help you get on that property ladder. Now buying with a friend doesn't mean that's a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a lover or something. It could just be somebody that wants to share the property with you. You could buy maybe a 2-bed flat, 2-bed house. You have a bedroom each. You have to toss a coin for who gets the biggest bedroom. But it gets you both into a property. Now you hear about disasters with these. You hear about people that didn't get on and they couldn't sell. But a lot of that's just the ones that go wrong. A lot of these deals have worked out very, very well for people. And let's face it, in a few years' time, you want to do your own thing. You sell the property, take the equity out that you've built up in that property, and then move on and go your separate ways. A joint venture is slightly different. This is where you're getting somebody to put the money up for the property. Maybe you pay them interest on that money. Maybe you pay them a share of the equity in the property, a bit like a government help to buy scheme, in fact. There are lenders now looking at these types of schemes where they'll lend you 100%. I did a podcast on this a couple of weeks ago where they'll give you 100% mortgage, but maybe they're taking a proportion of the equity, the future growth in that property. So that might be a way you can benefit and get yourself out of rented accommodation and into property. So that's the tips, right? I'll go through them quickly again. 1 is save for a deposit and use all the available schemes for you that you got out there, and set yourself targets for that as well and a goal. 2 is to build up and maintain your credit rating at all costs. Never miss payments, for instance. Number 3 is search for a cheaper property in an up-and-coming area. Look for an up-and-coming area and look to buy the worst property in the best street as opposed to the other way around. And number 4 is to ask for a parent or grandparent to consider using equity release schemes. That's pulling equity out of the property they already own right now to give you the money that you need to buy the property. A lot of people are doing this. There's a lot of money sloshing around on these types of schemes. It's a multi-billion-pound industry, but you may not have thought about it. Why wait till somebody dies to get the inheritance? Get it now, literally, if you want to put it that crudely. Number 5 is to consider rent-to-own deals, renting and buying your property more or less at the same time. Great way of getting it onto the property ladder, proving very property is growing all the time. And number 6 is to consider buying with a friend or using a joint venture arrangement to get yourself onto the property ladder now rather than renting. Now, if you'd like to know more about how you can get into property, I want to introduce you to a training webinar that a friend of mine is running. If you're watching this live, then it's in a few hours time, so register for that. If you're not watching this live, still register for it. There'll be another one coming very soon. So this is Property Investor Secrets, where you'll learn from experts how to buy property, how to get into the property market, how to buy and acquire property using none of your own money, using OPM, other people's money. Believe it or not, there are lots of ways out there to get into property, to earn money from property, to earn a fortune from property sometimes without even having to buy the property. So look at that webinar tonight, or if you're not watching this live tonight, click on the link anyway and you'll get onto the next one. I'll put that webinar absolutely free. It's packed full of information, and it will give you that little bit more information that you need that I can't provide on a 10-minute podcast. But this webinar will be a proper training session that will help you get into property. Who knows, it could change your life. It could start off as a side hustle and then become your full-time job. I've seen it happen many, many times that people got started in property. They had no money whatsoever, but they got into, they learned from experts and stood on the shoulders of giants and learned how to do it. And now they're up and running and they're becoming property millionaires. Why not you? If they can do it, you can do it. So check out that webinar, check out the link, and I'll be there and we'll see you there. Great. Thanks for listening. This is Charles Kelly, Money Tips Podcast and Property Podcast. See you soon. Click on that link for the webinar. Bye for now.